First event of a packed policy exchange calendar at the Labour Party conference. A welcome to all of you this morning. A slightly delayed start because of the big queues to get into conference this morning, I understand, so no doubt we'll be joined by others drifting in as the queues thin out. I'm delighted to welcome you all to the panel today, which is discussing the crime against shop workers and retailers. So we're going to be discussing shoplifting, violence and abuse. And I'm particularly delighted to be joined by this panel this morning. On my right, the Shadow Policing Minister, Alex Norris MP. Then next, Paul Richards, the Labour Cooperative Candidate for Police and Crime Commissioner for Sussex and a former Special Advisor. Then on my far right, Paddy Lillis, the General Secretary of USDOR. Everyone will know who USDOR is because you'll find them on the back of your lanyard there. On my left, the former Policing Minister and former Cabinet Minister, the Right Honourable Hazel Blears. And then all the way to my left, Paul Gerard, the Director of Campaigns and Public Affairs at the Co-op. So I'm delighted to be joined by them. The format this morning will take the usual usual process. I will open with just a few reflections, a few thoughts. Then each of our panellists will give their contribution for about 3 to 5 minutes, if we can, and then open to the floor for questions. So that's the plan for this morning. And certainly from a policy exchange perspective, from my perspective, I've got 3 points I wanted to open with. And the first is that this is a type of crime that is on the rise. Police reported crime for shoplifting was up 28% last year. The cost to retailers of shoplifting alone is about £1 billion, the British Retail Consortium estimates. And then the cost to retailers just for securing their stores and all of that sort of stuff runs to about £0.8 billion. So the costs involved are substantial. The second point I want to make is that all property crime, but particularly this sort of crime, is regressive. So in 2015, this is something that David Lammy, MP, wrote 2 reports for Policy Exchange about. And if you look at the data today, that problem remains the case. So 40% is the number, in that if you live in our poorest communities, in our poorest neighbourhoods, you are 40% more likely to be a victim of property crime than if you live in the most wealthy neighbourhoods. And some other context for this as well, if we look at police numbers, in Merseyside, there are 384 fewer police officers than there were in 2010, covering Liverpool and Southport. Cleveland, 246 fewer, covering places like Redcar and Middlesbrough. And Northumbria, 380 fewer, covering communities like Newcastle and the Blythe Valley. So this regressive nature of crime is really substantial when we look at property offences. And then the third point I would be keen to make is that the response to this sort of crime is lacklustre at best. So in 2014, the government, in what I might call an ill-judged decision, changed and downgraded shoplifting of property less than £200 to a summary-only offence. Last year, there were 28,000 shoplifting prosecutions out of an estimated 8 million offences. And the Met Commissioner recently described shoplifting as a capacity challenge for the police. So the question I would pose, given all of that I would pose to the panel is, so what do we do about it now? And so without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Alex Norris, Shadow Policing Minister, for your reflections on the situation we find ourselves in today.
Thanks, Dave. I might stand if that's all right.
Well, I'm told that if you stand, the microphone won't pick you up, and therefore the global audience that is listening to
would be a dreadful
comments
fate.
will miss what you're going to say. Alex.
We cannot deprive people on all 5 cameras of my dulcet tones. Well, good morning, friends. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Policy Exchange, as well, and to you, Dave. I'm Alex Norris. I'm the relatively new Shadow Policing Minister. But whilst I'm new to that brief, I'm in no way new to the issues of retail crime and violence against retail workers, and working with Paddy and USDOR and working with Paul and the Co-op group. I've been running private members' bills on this issue for as long as I've been in Parliament, trying to get the law changed and trying to enhance protections for retail workers. And, our retail workers have been real heroes. If you think about that dreadful time during the pandemic, especially in the early days, we're still learning about the virus. We're increasingly being told to shut ourselves away, to stay away from each other. those people were going to work every day. Those shop workers were opening the doors, making sure we were fed and watered, genuine acts of heroic public service. Similarly, you know, and I feel this as a parliamentarian, people like me over many, many, many years have asked those shop workers to restrict the sale of certain items. So whether that's alcohol to people who are already drunk, cigarettes to children, acids and knives, you know, you name it. And each one of those moments is a friction moment. And those are circumstances where they are at greater risk. We owe them to have their back for that. But actually what the reward is skyrocketing degrees of violence and abuse, what Dave says around crime, and then 850 incidents of violence and abuse every single day. And that's not acceptable. Where we are at the moment in terms of public policy, the response isn't serious enough. You know, the Home Secretary talks about the police following all reasonable lines of inquiry. Well, we know in the context of what you say around policing 10,000 fewer police on the beat, well, that's, you know, the resource is too stretched. Similarly, the policing minister talks a lot about the importance of citizens' arrest. Well, I get to steal Paul's line before he uses it, sorry, Paul. But at the co-op, when they do use that with their skilled staff who are trained to do so, 4 in every 5 times they have to let that person go because there's no one able to come to make the arrest. So that alone will not work. So what might be better? Well, first of all, it's a restoration, rebuilding of neighbourhood policing. I'm always slightly nervous talking the day before Yvette's speech, not to give away too much, but you know that we have the signature commitment to 13,000 more police and police community support officers, so visible people on the streets who know their communities and getting away from this sense that actually no one's bothered, you can do what you want because there's no one around. Well, there will be people around. A stronger focus, as we're starting to see in some forces, on repeat perpetration. We know that nearly 2/3 of these offences are committed by the same people, so a smarter approach there. And of course, in Police and Crime Commissioner election years, seeing more in police and crime plans I think is really important. We've got Alan Michael, the chair of Labour's Police and Crime Commissioners, with us today. I'm sure he might say a little bit about that. So I think we can, you know, we have had successes in this together. Daniel Johnson, our friend in the Scottish Parliament, getting a consolidated offence ourselves. We managed to get violence and abuse against a retail worker as an aggravating factor. So, you know, we have moved the agenda on, but there is much more to do. But we can grip it. This is not inevitable, and it's certainly not acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex. I'm going to move on to Paddy.
Okay, thanks. Good morning, everyone. First, can I start by thanking yourselves, the Policy Exchange, and the Co-op for organising this incredibly important event. We were facing an epidemic of retail crime, which is hugely concerning for us as a union representing retail workers. Our members have reported that they are often faced with hardened criminals in the stores where they work every other day. And we know that retail workers are much more likely to be abused by those who are stealing to sell goods on. Our research shows that last year shoplifting was the trigger for 31% of instances of threats, abuse and violence towards our members. It's more than double the rate when compared to 2016. And this evidence shows that it's not just the press reports. Retail crime, abuse of retail workers is getting significantly worse. And one key factor behind the rise in crime is addiction, with people stealing simply as a means to feed habits. Unfortunately, when challenged, these criminals will typically do all they can to ensure that they're not detained in a store or detained by the police. And as being detained will mean they will experience withdrawal, and as a result, us, the members, are commonly threatened with assault, stabbings or needle attacks, just so these addicts can avoid detention. It's clear that the solution to this problem lies in tackling addiction. Whilst we have seen useful pilots such as the Offenders to Rehab programme in the West Midlands, there's been no nationwide strategy to tackle one of the key drivers of retail crime. A further sign of the government's reluctance to tackle the issue, it was telling that during last week's Conservative Party conference, neither the Home Secretary or the Prime Minister made any mention of tackling retail crime. Alex, we need a government to take the issue of retail crime seriously, not by suggesting citizens' arrests or ignoring the problems that even exist, but by taking positive steps and actions which have broad consensus across the industry. Steps such as creating a specific offence of abusing, threatening or assaulting a retail worker, delivering the resources to enable coordination between police forces and retailers, and developing a single national reporting tool so that we can gather accurate data and support retail workers in the front line, providing support to those who have been the victim of abuse or crime at work, and funding recovery programs which can remove the blight of addiction from our communities. These solutions will not be easy, but the scale of the crisis requires us to do what is difficult. And once again, can I thank the Policy Exchange and the Co-op for organising this important event.
Yeah.
Paddy, thanks very much for those important comments. And now I'll turn to Hazel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Delighted to be here, and delighted to be here with Alex as well. And I just want to make a few points, and then I'm going to recommend something that I think is probably quite radical. So let's see where we go. First of all, shoplifting is not a victimless crime. What happens is, as well as the assaults on shop workers, and I was on the Co-op board for 6 years and hearing these stories time and time again, but actually also the prices of the food on sale, the prices go up because you're having to do more security measures. So everybody loses out. So the idea that shoplifting is somehow a minor thing, that's a victimless crime and we don't need to take any action about it, is absolutely wrong. The thing that I'm going to recommend is, why don't we bring back antisocial behaviour orders? You know, when I was the MP in Salford, we were overrun with organised crime gangs, and that's what a lot of this shoplifting is now. It's OGCs that have taken the law into their own hands, that are using and manipulating other people in order to do major theft. And, you know, unless we do some really radical things, we're just not going to stop it. It's just going to spiral out of control. And, you know, I know that antisocial behaviour orders were quite controversial sometimes, particularly amongst the liberal kind of fraternity. But it was one of the things that actually protected ordinary working class people from being exploited in this way. Antisocial behaviour in our community was utterly out of control. Once we got a great chief superintendent who used the law at every possible opportunity, we started to put the decent people first and actually to start, you know, putting away some of the really, really serious criminals. And so I was very disappointed when Theresa May, it was, I think, in 2010, actually decided to review antisocial behaviour orders. She said they were too time-consuming, they were too expensive, and therefore we would resort to this other thing called a criminal behaviour order, of which there are far fewer orders. And the reason that is because the burden of proof on a criminal behaviour order is beyond reasonable doubt. It's the criminal standard. On antisocial behaviour, it was on a balance of probabilities, so you didn't have to go to great lengths. I mean, you had to have proof, you weren't doing it arbitrarily, but then just to abandon everything that was done. And for me, the antisocial behaviour order was, I suppose, the epitome of being tough on crime and tough on the causes of crime, because it wasn't just that you got an ASBO and if you breached it, you went to jail. There was also a whole raft of community ways to support you, to get you out of this antisocial behaviour trap, which many young people got trapped into by the organised crime gangs. So we had family intervention projects of families who in the past had had really very little support to change their lives around. We had employment programs for people to get qualifications so they didn't have to be marauding around the streets and terrifying good, decent, law-abiding people. And so tough on crime and tough on the causes of crime, I think, was probably nowhere better illustrated than in this kind of antisocial behaviour that was viewed as low-level crime, but actually traumatised so many people's lives for such a long time. And now when you see those videos of the serious criminals scooping, you know, alcohol in particular, off the shelves, it's actually really frightening to experience that if you're close up to it. So I would like to see a review of the criminal behaviour orders. I'd like to see the standard of proof being on the balance of probabilities. I'd like to see that when there are breaches of the criminal behaviour orders, if we're going to stick with that, there are only 2,500 criminal behaviour orders. I think there's a lot more antisocial behaviour going on than those 2,500 orders. But I would like to see it to be easier to be able to get the convictions, but I would like to see it to be easier to be able to get the convictions and for people to be appropriately punished, but also to be helped to lead a different kind of life And that's what Tough on Crime and Tough on the Causes of Crime was always about. It wasn't just about locking people up. It was about giving them different ways to lead their life and become decent, well-meaning citizens in local communities. And now you can see that where we've let that go and where these powers are not being used, then actually the bad guys are in control. And I don't think that's any way to run a democracy where you cede power to criminals to be able to exploit ordinary, decent, hard-working people. I think we've a job on our hands, and I don't believe that antisocial behaviour orders were too expensive and too time-consuming. I think they were there to protect the decent, law-abiding majority of people in their communities. Shoplifting is going up. In times when times are hard, shoplifting always goes up. So we've got, a double whammy here of an economy that's struggling, but also the shoplifting menace that there is here. And shoplifting does go up, not just for organised crime gangs, but when people are really struggling to put food on the table. So this is an economic issue as well as it being a crime issue. And I just wish there was a lot more energy around, and when I've talked to Alex, I can tell he's got this energy, he's got this drive to actually do something about it. So there's going to be a lot on your shoulders, Alex, but I have every confidence that you're going to grip this and you're going to be on the side of decent, law-abiding people.
Thank you, Hazel. I've got to say, I hadn't appreciated the number of CBOs, the 2,600. When I was policing in my part of North London, I think we had that number of ASBOs just for North London. Yeah. So I'm a little bit taken aback, but I hadn't appreciated that number, actually. Anyway, without further ado, I'm going to move on to Paul Richards. Thank you.
Hello, so I'm Paul Richards. I'm a candidate for Police and Crime Commissioner in Sussex. I wanted to just pick up where the Policy Exchange left off last week in Manchester, which was the now infamous comments by the policing minister at a PX fringe meeting, not unlike this, I suspect. He said, I would like to remind everyone, including the wider public, including shop staff and security guards, they do have the power of citizens' arrest. Where it's safe to do so, I would encourage that to be used, including potentially a physical challenge. Now, this is a Minister of the Crown in charge of the policing, basically advocating a sort of have-a-go hero, DIY police, get stuck in approach, which will only end up in citizens being harmed and in harm's way and possibly being injured themselves. I heard somebody talking about this the other day. The amount of physical effort involved in having to restrain somebody and tackle them to the ground and to then hold them until the police come, if they come, and we know that in most cases they do not, is enormous. And here is a minister advocating this. And I think if you seek a metaphor for the Conservative approach to policing, it is this, which is basically, we're not going to help you, we're not on your side, there aren't the numbers to come out, do it yourself. Do it yourself. And that, I think, serves as words that should be hung around his neck. Now, the second point I wanted to make was, as an insurgent candidate standing against a Conservative Police and Crime Commissioner, I think it's really very important that we do not allow them to get away with not standing on their record. So I've got Katie Bourne in Sussex. She is trying to claim credit for more police on the streets of Sussex. And she's trying to claim credit for some of the initiatives they've taken, perfectly laudable initiatives to tackle shop theft. But whose problem is she trying to fix? It's a problem that they themselves created. And so she should not be allowed, and none of them should be allowed to not stand on their record. You'll know Sunak is trying to present himself as the change maker, the insurgent, the populist against us as the establishment. That's the paradigm they're trying to establish, and we mustn't allow that, because it would be utterly unfair and criminal to do so. And that leads me to my third and final point. I mean, I have to say, I sat at Hazel's feet for, 10 years when she was an MP and the police minister, and then I served as her special advisor. I've learned all my politics from her, and I think she makes such an important point about the causes of crime. And I would just remind her of an argument that she used to advance, and I think is very, very true, which is that if you take the public space and you basically run up the white flag and you withdraw from that public space, you beat the retreat, so you remove the uniformed presence, whether it's police or PCSOs, if you take away you know, bus conductors, if you take away park attendants, you take away people, adult people in spaces where they can exercise some authority and create a social norm of decent behaviour, if you do that, I'll be really surprised that organised crime then moves into that space to take the things off the shelves with impunity and to create an idea that shoplifting is somehow socially acceptable, because if you do it, you're going to get away with it. So the causes of crime argument has to be unearthed, I think, and that broader sociological point about broken windows. You know, if you leave the space to others, they will you will see the vacuum filled by people who don't share our sense of decency and norms. So let's link this whole issue together with the failure of the Conservatives, but also with the kind of vision for a society that we want as a Labour government, where the public realm is returned to the public and we feel safe walking down our own streets and in our town centres and our high streets. Thank you very much.
Paul, thank you very much, and to Paul Gerard. And I just want to express my gratitude as well to you and the Co-op, Paul, because you've been doing some sterling work driving this up the policy agenda, and I think much needed. So I just want to express my gratitude to the Co-op as well for this. But over to you.
Thank you, David. That's very kind. I'll try not to repeat what others have said better than me, but just a few points. We run 2,500 stores across the country in the Co-op group. We also supply to 5,000 independent retailers. In our 2,500 stores today, it's probably a good thing, Richard, but I'll try again. We run 2,500 stores across the country as Co-op group. We also supply to 5,000 independent retailers. Today, in those 2,500 stores that we run, 1,000 incidents will be reported. Those incidents will not involve someone nicking a loaf of bread and a pint of milk. There will be serious, significant incidents of theft, violence or abuse. 1,000 today, there was 1,000 yesterday, there'll be 1,000 tomorrow and every day so far this year. That's 42% up, okay? It is about, in the main, that rise is driven by people stealing to resell. And as Hazel rightly said, there is probably a bigger market now for stolen goods because people are struggling. But the people who are stealing this, persistent and prolific offenders, are stealing to resell. And the costs, just to put a number on the cost, the Association of Convenience Stores, who have 25,000 members, they estimate that the security measures that independent retailers have to take, and that in terms of loss of stock, means that every time someone shops in an independent convenience store, they pay an extra 6 pence per transaction to pay for the costs of the lost stock and the costs of security measures. A 6 pence per transaction tax every single time. What I would say, the first responsibility to tackle this is for shops. It is not for the police. It is for businesses to look after their shops, their products and their colleagues. At the Co-op group, we spend about £200 million over the last few years. That means that on average we spend 4 times per store than the sector average. So that could look like tech, it could look like body-worn cameras and headsets, it could look like product protection. You have cases around steaks, you'll have caps on spirits, you'll have dummy products, or it could look like guarding. We spend tens of millions of pounds a year on guarding, either overt guarding that you can see at the door, or it could be covert, undercover guarding of specialist teams. So businesses have got to take, and businesses have then got to, and I've heard Alan make this point absolutely rightly, businesses have got to reach out and look to work with police. And we've got to do more of that, absolutely. So businesses have got to take this seriously. But the last point I would make, and just to put some, you know, Alex has stolen one of my numbers. I'll forgive him. He's done enough to have credit in the bank for that. The police, we only report serious incidents. Okay, we only report serious incidents. The police do not turn up in 70% of those incidents. Where we have detained, as Alex said, where we have detained through a specialist team the offender, the police don't turn up 8 times out of 10. That means that we let the individual go. Let me just put a little bit of flavour on that. Ilford. Gang coming in, masked men, sometimes armed, coming in 2 or 3 times a week in order to steal the entire kiosk. So vapes, spirits, expensive goods that are behind the kiosk. They jump the kiosk, which means my colleague stuck behind the kiosk with these individuals. They take it out 2 or 3 times a week. My colleague, Sarah, store manager, rings up. The response from the Metropolitan Police, by the time we get there, they won't be there. So in future, report this on 101. 101 is by definition the non-emergency line. So for an armed robbery, that was the response, 101. And in terms of the policing minister and citizens' arrest, one of my colleagues who's a security guard was being given all manner of racist abuse by a group of young individuals, 15, 16. As he tried to calm them down, one of them hit him, smacked him in the face. He got hold of him and rang the police. He made a citizen's arrest, as the policing minister says we should do. Right? 20 minutes later, the police hadn't turned up, but this kid's family had turned up, and you can imagine what happened to the security guard next. So this is about a partnership between the police and businesses. It's about businesses investing properly and taking the lead and looking to work with police, but it is about the police responding and coming to the table. It is fixable. Things that have been done by Sussex Police, by Nottinghamshire Police, by Essex Police says that if you identify hotspots with retailers, they will identify the offenders, you can take them out. And when you take them out, the last point, David, and I'll stop now, it's no point sending someone to prison and that's the only response. As Hazel just said, you've got to look at what's behind that, and very often it is substance abuse issues, offender to rehab in the West Midlands. If you've not heard of it, just Google it. What PC Stuart Too Good does in the West Midlands is amazing, but it's funded by the Co-op Group, by Central England Co-op, by Boots. Core public services should not be funded by businesses. There's a thing called Operation Pegasus, which is designed to create an intelligence picture of organised crime affecting retailers in the UK. It's being funded by 10 businesses who are paying for police officers to do the intel work. We need a proper approach to this, and we need to take it seriously because, as Paddy says, this is fundamentally about individuals, communities, and the shops that are those anchor institutions in those communities. Thank you, David.
Thanks very much, Paul. And it really is shocking to hear the experience of your staff and Paddy, your members as well. It really drives home just how this really isn't victimless, that it really isn't. I've got one question I'm going to ask Alex, and then open to the floor for questions, if I may. So I'll get in there first, if I may, and then I'll come to people in the audience there. Alex, Hazel's talked a lot about the effectiveness of antisocial behaviour orders, the number of them, the difference around ASBOs versus CBOs. What would you've talked, and of course we all know about the intention for 13,000 more police officers and PCSOs. What about what's the Labour position around ASBOs, CBOs, civil powers, those sorts of things? What's the intention there?
Well, we think the civil toolkit is a really important part of the approach to tackling antisocial behaviour on this issue and more broadly. So Yvette committed in February, and it was in our crime mission when we launched that earlier this year around respect orders, which I think will have certainly some parallels in what Hazel was saying. We think that that's really appropriate and kind of effective first tool to try and restrict. But I will go back to what's saying. You can have all the tools in the world, but unless you have people out there who are able to use them, then they're not going to be effective. So you have to have that staffing element of people who are out there able to use those civil powers to compete again, as Paul says, so that the minority who do this sort of thing will know that it won't go unchallenged.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So I'm going to open to questions. I'll take three at a go, and we'll do those, and then we'll come back for others. So Alan Michael, Police and Crime Commissioner for South Wales, I'll go to first, and then I will come to the lady next to him, and then the gentleman of the aisle, and then I'll move back as we go. Alan, thank you.
Thanks very much indeed. Is that working?
Yep.
Yeah. Hazel's made my day. Because some of you may be aware, I invented the antisocial behaviour order when Jack Straw was in a plane from America to London. Unfortunately, when he landed, he agreed with the idea and we introduced it. The reason it was undermined was that it was intended for adults, not for children. So very much for the sort of people we're talking about here. It was applying it to children that undermined general confidence in it. The question I wanted to ask was, with the current government, we're used to dealing with the consequences of bad decisions. Why don't we make more of the impact of good decisions and use them everywhere? I've already, in an earlier meeting, challenged Paul on this in terms of the, our need apply things that worked in one area elsewhere. But just want to give an example, and I think it's quite a powerful one. The old drug intervention programme was joint with policing and probation to provide drug treatment services at the custody suite and to the client of probation. As Police and Crime Commissioners, we inherited that. One of the things that I did was to negotiate with HMPPS so that the same people provide the service in the 3 prisons in South Wales. But we went beyond that with additional police money going as investment to provide the same service for a year after people come out of prison. Just recently, the policing minister complained that under a third of people who come out of prison on a treatment programme continue in a treatment programme. And I thought, well, I'm not sure what our figures are. I've checked. They're between 70 and 80% do continue. And surprise, surprise, South Wales is now an outlier in terms of reduction of acquisitive crime. Why? Because if they come out of prison, go off the programme, they go back to drugs, they steal to feed the habit, and of course shoplifting is one of the easier aspects of acquisitive crime. So there's a lesson there, it seems to me, for the joining up of public services, but there are many other examples as well. Why don't we take the things that work and apply them universally everywhere? It takes a cooperative approach between police and crime commissioners, and we've got a good team of them, as well as cooperation between different parts of the retail trade. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alan. I should have said as well beforehand, I mean, everyone knows who Alan Michael is, the PCC for South Wales, but I should say for questions, please do tell us who you are and what your organisation is, and no question is too odd or bizarre for this panel. They will take anything on. So, yes.
Hi, my name is Rizvana Paul. I live in Chipping Norton. I'm a district councillor in West Oxfordshire. It's a request for Alex to please take into consideration rural communities. We don't have the uniformed presence, the knowledge, or the experience to deal with this explosion of criminal gangs. And secondly, we can't disregard the link between the cost of living crisis and the increase in shoplifting. Whilst I appreciate they're not all Jean Valjean, the fact that infant formula is now security tagged, it's just a damning indictment of this government's priorities.
Thank you very much. And I think there was a question, the gentleman just down here as well. And again, your name and your organisation. Thank you.
Okay, my name's Mo Razak. I'm a councillor in South Lanarkshire, Rutherglen, the one that won the seat. So we're celebrating just now. I'm wearing another hat. I'm the Vice President for the Federation for Independent Retailers. So we did some work with Listo and yourselves for Daniel Johnson, Labour MP's bill for protection of retail workers. We have over 10,000 members, and the questions I would have is, firstly, we need more social work investment in our local government. I think that is vital if you want to tackle this, because without that, we'll not win. We have spoken to the PCCs about the issues facing the smaller shops. The smaller shops have got poorer security systems, and in order to get an arrest made and prosecution, you need good CCTV system, and that's vital. And what we're asking for is some form of a security grant, and that security grant will help pay towards a security system, and that's what we would be asking for. The other thing about citizens' arrest would be reasonable force. What is reasonable force? So we could easily have a customer being charged for assault, and my final point would be mental health. Our staff and the retailers are suffering from mental health because they're under siege, and they're under siege because of the fact that when they're challenging a shoplifter, they're being threatened, they're being bullied, and they're being intimidated. And the thing is that there's not really a recourse. I know that there's a charity that helps, Grocery Aid, and that helps with that, and we do put our members onto that, but they shouldn't need to be at this level, and it's totally toxic just now, what they're facing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So a smorgasbord of issues there for our panel to cover. Alex, I'm going to come to you first on rural communities. And if there are other things you want to touch on, please feel free to, but particularly rural communities first, if we can.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it was one of my messages for this week that there's, we're building towards an election. Rural communities are a huge part of, of the road to number 10, and we should be very clear that we have an offer for rural communities. Policing, I think, is a really important part of that, because the thin blue line is spread that bit thinner by nature of geography. The extra staff on the beat, I think, would help there. Having a named officer in certain villages as well, so that there is that connection and that reassurance. But it is spread. I mean, that again, as part of having that repeat offender model, that means that people can't go from village to village or town to town. That speaks actually to the point about the final point around local government, having that partnership model to tackling repeat offenders, because they will be touching other services in other ways. And then just finally to say for Alan on the I think it's a really important point about the nature of policing. Having 43 police forces, that sometimes there are all the time there are excellent behaviours in some forces do one thing really well, and others might do others. We have to tell that tale. It's actually why the PCC role is so important, because they can be that kind of advocate and that that networked link amongst their colleagues, and hopefully we will have a few more when we're sat here this time next year. So I think we have to do that so that best practice, that rising tide raises all boats.
Yeah. Thanks very much. Paul, on the piece about security systems, and particularly for smaller retailers as well, because I know Co-op have done some work on this.
Yeah, and if colleagues in the room remember one phrase, remember that phrase, under siege? The shop workers, particularly independent shop workers, and we wholesale to 5,000 of them, are under siege every day. There's a real risk that the big businesses, and the Co-op is an £11 billion a year business, we can afford to spend 4 times the sector average on security. Absolutely. The problem doesn't go away, it gets displaced, absolutely, to smaller retailers who perhaps can't afford that kind of security. So, this is why it's got to be, as Alan put it, a cooperative approach across the sector, so you can begin to solve the problem, not just push it to one point. One point we'll make, and for Alex, and thinking about this, if one of our colleagues, members in Scotland, put in CCTV as a security measure, the rates bill will go up, because the value of the property goes up. So what we are doing is we are literally penalising a business for taking responsible action to try to help the police do their job and protect their store. That retailer will be penalised because the rates bill will go up. That is bonkers, and needs to be addressed.
Thanks very much. Hazel, do you want to touch on particularly around Alan's point around drug intervention programmes and how they can work and whether they're successful? I remember as a fairly young police constable, when you were policing minister, I think it was, drug intervention workers were in custody. Every time we brought someone in, they would get tested for most crimes, and then they would be handed over to the drug team if necessary. And I think that was something, that you were part of, certainly.
Yeah. I think Alan's point's incredibly well made, because when government goes wrong, it's usually when it's all fractured and people are not talking to each other. Ministers perhaps don't have the strongest relationships with each other. If you can get that right, then actually, you don't have to spend more money, but you make more impact because you're working together. And before I was police minister, I was public health minister, responsible for all the drug intervention projects and everything else. And so I took that kind of memory with me into my role as police minister, and it influenced me all the time. It wasn't just about coercive policing, it was about looking at the range of social problems and medical issues that people had and trying to help them change their behaviour for the long term. If they didn't want the help, then we'd get a bit tougher. But a lot of people who are in this situation, they don't choose necessarily to be in it. They've been seduced into it. It damages their mental and physical health, and then they end up committing crimes as like a last resort. So I do think that the joining up point that Alan made is absolutely crucial. And we did experiment for some time as having kind of ministers with joint briefs in different departments. And I'm not sure how successful that was, probably not that much because it wasn't that well thought out, but actually exposing ministers to the other arguments and the other side of the coin, I think is really, really valuable. So if we're training our next set of ministers to come through, let's train them in cooperating with other bits, because you'll both save money and you'll be more effective. I mean, I was delighted, Alex, to learn about the respect orders, because when we did the respect campaign, okay, Louise KC is as tough as they come, but we took that right around the country. We had a national kind of programme to go into the places where people had lost the spirit to fight back, and say, we're on your side, we're with you, we're going to make this happen. And the family intervention projects of chaotic families who had 6 or 7 social workers all intervening in their lives. We gave them one single person that could then access all of the services to enable them to improve their own circumstances. So there are different ways of doing this. And I think my plea really is for us to be more creative than certainly the current government is, where it's just a security response. If you can empower the community actually to take action, and I don't mean by citizens' arrest, but to feel strong together in your community so that you can work with the police side by side. When we did the PCSOs and we did all of the neighbourhood watch and all of that, you know, neighbourhood policing is what made certainly a community like mine, it made it feel an awful lot safer than when people were isolated on their own and not supported.
Hazel, thanks very much. Paul, let me just come to you from a police and crime commissioner, or prospective police and crime commissioner perspective, about the sort of join up of local services, because I think that's one of the things that we're hearing as a theme here. And you know, what does that look like? So whether we're talking about drug intervention, mental health, the police, the courts, what does that look like from a local perspective?
Well, I think the big barrier is that most people don't even know they have a police and crime commissioner. They don't vote for them because the turnouts are so low. And I think it's a role that is still struggling to sort of establish itself in the public mind as that coordination role that you describe. I mean, of course, where we have incumbent ones, and particularly the Labour ones, they are struggling to, or striving to, join up services and to link it across the piece. But I think there is just a legitimacy issue that needs to be fixed. And I don't know what Labour's going to do with police and crime commissioners, actually, whether we're going to pursue it or whether we're going to change the electoral system, whether we're going to make them cover smaller patches, I don't know. No change. Well, no change for now, but, you know, who knows as the development of the government. Can I just say 2 things very, very quickly? One, rural crime absolutely needs to be picked up, because we are now fighting seats with big rural hinterlands. It's not just about the cities. I remember the NFU, not Natural Allies of Labour, coming in and briefing us when I was standing last time, and it's just incredibly useful to think about, you know, people stealing agricultural equipment to order, just in the same way they're stealing stuff out of the shops. We have to address that. And I'd add a final sort of rider on that, which is coastal communities. Obviously, a big chunk of Sussex is Hastings, Worthing, Brighton, Eastbourne, and it's not about police on the beat, it's police on the beach. Because those areas have been similarly stripped of all their public representation and whatever. And women in particular tell me that the beach is no longer safe for women to go to and swim and enjoy themselves. They are routinely harassed and catcalled and abused. And so we need that uniform presence on the beach too. There we are, a bit cheeky, but there we are. That's just
important points. Thank you very much, Paul. Paddy?
Yeah, I mean, Alan raised a really important sort of question in terms of working together more. And I wouldn't want to give the impression that there's no working together. There's an incredible amount of good work going on out there with the British Retail Conserving, Association of Convenience Stores, all the main employers, Tesco, Morrison, Sainsbury's, the Co-op, Town, all the retailers working together to try to address the whole aspect of violence and abuse of work. But there's a number of aspects to it from my perspective. I come here today to talk about the human toll. I mean, the cost is, we've heard, £1.8 billion and rising every year. We all pay a price for that. But of course, the human toll, when I listen every day to the heartbreaking stories of our members ringing our office, looking help and support, where one recently there in the northeast who intervened to stop a young girl being abused at the checkout, and he's just saying, enough's enough. I never even get the words out, and he gets stabbed in the eye with a screwdriver. Now, you know, I mean, violence could have cost a life. We've lost retail workers over the last 25 years where they've chased after shoplifters have been hit their head and lost their life. Now they're worse than probably 8% of serious assaults. But of course, verbal abuse, which we've heard 1,000 cases a day of verbal threats and violence, and that's the tip of the iceberg. We're running a campaign now to report it, to sort it, to get proper data so that the police and the parliamentarians can look at and listen to. So, I mean, you take someone in terms of just being verbally abused every day. You're coming into work, you don't know who's coming through the door next. Your mental health's affected. You go off work, that puts more pressure on the retailers. That means there's an additional cost there as well. There's a cost to the National Health Service in terms of medical bills, psychiatrics and everything else that goes with it. So it isn't a victimless crime, it's costing millions. And of course, the downside, this government won't listen. We've got the retailers just before the Conservative Party conference, 88 senior CEOs, senior members of employers wrote to the Home Secretary outlining that it's spiralling out of control. Not only, and I concentrated on addiction, of course, it's more than addiction. It's the cost of living, the poverty that's out there. You've got the addiction and, of course, the criminal gangs that's been raised. And the government, in the whole of the Conservative Party conference, not once mentioned retail crime, not once was it put on their agenda. And that tells you where it is. We need to lift this up the agenda. It's a serious effect on our communities, on our families. Somebody's mother, father, son or daughter is getting abused, assaulted every single day in this country. When you have retail workers running around with body cams on, stab-proof vests, more CCTV been put in, independent retailers been targeted because they're an easy target, and the police not turning up. What's going on in 21st century Britain? We're one of the richest countries in the Western world, and we have this endemic crime going on within our society, and it's just a whole breakdown of communities. And we need Alex and the crime and police and crime commissioners, everyone working together, because if this happens in our society breaks down. As you said, you leave the space, the criminal fraternity will take it over and terrorise our communities. And I mean, I'm saying enough's enough. I'll continue to work with all the politicians of all shades, with the police and crime commissioners, with all the employers, to try to bring this to an end and get proper legislation that Daniel Johnson done in Scotland to make it an aggravated assault, and people can't go to prison for it. Of course, not deter people with addictions, because addictions, again, is a social issue for us. We need to put the services in there to try to wean people off that, to protect communities in the long term. So I just wanted to get that bit out while I'm here, because it's really important to me. You know?
Thank you, Paddy. Thanks very much. More questions from the floor. I'll take a question from this lady here. Then we'll go to the back, gentlemen, two gentlemen at the back there, and hopefully we'll come back down the front if we have time. So I can see we have 7 minutes left, so if we can make it a very short question, short answers, then we may get through everyone. Yes, madam.
I'll try. Hi, I'm
who you are and where you're from.
From Gisborough, which is in Cleveland. We have pretty much next to no resources. We've had a massive epidemic in our local shops being broken into. How can we help support our retailers at this moment in time?
Brilliant. I'm glad we got to you because I grew up in Saltburn, just down the road, so I'm delighted. The two gentlemen at the back there.
Hi, I'm Lewis.
Who you are and where you're from.
I'm a councillor from Green Street in Newham, which is just down the road from Ilford. You were telling that story earlier. It's pretty, it felt resonant. I represent a ward with Big Street Inn, with an independent trade association and a lot of supermarkets, all of which are subject to crime. I've tried to organise a meeting between those groups, the shop manager of the local Tesco and the local S&T team. The local S&T team doesn't respond to my emails, and as soon as one does, it's to tell me that they're leaving and they're moving to a new role. Is there a disparity of esteem within that kind of community policing, which means that it doesn't happen? Is there a lack of training? Do people not know how to respond to emails? Is it just a lack of priority by policing generally?
Okay, thank you very much. And then the gentleman next to you.
Hi, I'm Mike from McDonald's. Completely endorse everything Paul said. The issue is the number one issue across the 1,400 restaurants we have across the country. A question for Alex, really. Paul made some really important points at the end around the level of funding businesses are putting in, the likes of Operation Pegasus. And Paul also said there that businesses shouldn't be funding that level of support. So really interested to get your reflections on What do you think about that level of support, and what would a future Labour government do about either replacing that level of funding, or what would you like to see from businesses in this area if you're in government?
Thank you. I'm equally delighted that you're from McDonald's, because I started my career at McDonald's while I was at university and doing my A-levels. 6 years on the shop floor. Great start to my career. Alex.
Well, I thought I was going to get through the whole session without doing the disclaimer about no financial commitments that aren't fully costed. And I'm not making any, and I know our friends from Conservative Central Office are watching, and they won't get me today. But, you know, I think one of the messages that comes strongly from Paul, you know, is actually that, you know, he feels and his business feel, and actually this is increasingly the sense across the sector, that they do have a responsibility to put money into it. You know, it is their first responsibility to make sure their staff are safe, and I think that's very welcome. I think we always have to be, you know, when it comes to specific operations, to make sure that we're careful, we've got the appropriate firewall. I know it's been a question in the past with, say, tobacco control. But as I say, I think it is good that we want business to be taking that stake in the protection of their staff. And I'll just address the how can we help? Well, you know, the action that we've got so far, both in Scotland and in England and Wales, came because we campaigned hard. You know, we kept getting 100,000 signatures on petitions to keep dragging ministers to debate it, till eventually we managed to get something over the line. So we're going to have to do that. But actually, we've got the ultimate bit of social action coming up. Police and Crime Commissioner elections. So in Cleveland, you know, please support your candidate. He's got a huge patch to cover, needs that help. And then, of course, we've got a general election. So, you know, this is a change moment. We've got to get out there and fight for it.
Thank you, Alex. We've got 3 minutes to go, and I'm conscious there's a couple more questions. So I'm going to try, if we can be very quick, name, organisation, and what your question is. Lady down here, Claire, please. And I think, yes, and then the gentleman there.
Danielle Stone. I'm a councillor in Northampton, and I'm the prospective Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner for Northamptonshire. I'm in a ward where it's like the Wild West, to be perfectly honest with you, and it's scary. It's really scary. I take young people home from youth club once a week. It's scary. I wouldn't let them walk through town on their own. It's scary for women. It's scary for young people. So something is desperately needed. If I wasn't a member of the Labour Party, I would have joined today, because I found you all really inspirational, both in your analysis and in your ability to problem solve and offer us solutions. So thank you for that. One of the issues for us in Northamptonshire, I'm sure it's replicated everywhere, is where are the police? Where are they? We're hemorrhaging police. Community policing is obviously a huge answer. We need more people representative of our communities joining the police force. How are we going to do that? Too many barriers.
Thank you, Danielle. There was a gentleman there with a question, and then we're going to rapidly wrap up, I think.
Thank you. I'm Daniel Francis. I'm a councillor in London Borough Bexley. Hazel used to come down to us back in the day. I spent 11 years on the shop floor, so I know exactly what it's like. But my question is, 13 years of austerity, obviously, have cut that community safety team that Hazel used to come and see, cut our public health teams, and what role really local government's going to have in trying to bring those agencies back together to help some of these issues about these people that are coming in and creating these problems in shops.
Brilliantly. Thank you. I'll go to Paul Richards on Danielle's question. Where are the police? As a fellow PCC candidate, where are the police?
Well, I'll return to my point, which the Tories cut them, and they're now trying to claim benefit for them being put out on the street. It's like burgling your house and then trying to sell your goods back to you, isn't it? I mean, absolutely ridiculous. So we need to make that argument in the elections. And those that have mentioned the dirty word elections, you know, I would remind you that this is going to be in May, 6 months away, possibly on the same date as a general election, so a higher turnout. It does give us an enormous opportunity to make these arguments and to get the Labour case for law and order and also tackling the causes of crime out there. So do join in the campaign. I'll defer to my betters on all the other topics, but thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Paul. And Alex, just as time wraps up, we have literally 1 minute. Daniel, councillor in Bexley, talked about the sort of 13 years of austerity and his sort of reflections about his experience in Bexley. Alex, I'll leave it to you to wrap up.
Yeah, I mean, because we have seen across all the partners, there's, you know, that kind of pulling back as there's been less resource. As Hazel says, that, you know, there's not going to be huge amounts of money to change that. We're going to have to be better at working together again. That's never changed. I'm enthusiastic about community safety partnerships. I think they were always a very good place for that. But I just want to finish on, because we haven't covered the disparity question of esteem. I think it's a capacity issue, because we have to, you know, what we shouldn't lose in this is that up and down the country we've got police and police staff who are doing a brilliant job, who are working really hard, who are being asked to do too much with too little. and as a result, the question is where, you know, they then get frustrations that are not around. So, you know, we have to add that back. We have to elevate, you know, the status as a career as well. And Danielle, that talks to the diversity point. Police staff is a very good way for changing that too. So, you know, I think that's the answer, and that's why, you know, we're so committed to making that change.
Alex, thanks very much. Well, I see that I've overrun by about 30 seconds. So before our events team rugby tackle us from the stage, I just want to express my gratitude to all of you for being here this morning. Of course, to this esteemed panel, thank you to all of you. Really enlightening discussion. My thanks to the Co-op for their partnership with the work that's been going on with Policy Exchange, and of course to our brilliant events team who have been sending this event to the global audience of millions. And I hope you all have a great day here at the Labour Party conference. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. Well done. Well done.